Gun Galleria here. I have an interesting one today. I try to find interesting firearms, things that are a little different. And this one would definitely go along with that. So, I was on Guns International, and this one had been kind of nagging at me for a while. And I finally just said, fine, I'll do it. The scope rings have been taken off. I will be putting a scope on this at some point. But what we have here is typical Mauser action. But through this opening, I can see the stars in a circle with the top of an American eagle. So you know it's definitely nothing in the chamber. Now, that is the marking you find for Federal Ordinance. Federal Ordinance back in the 80s imported Mausers and basically scrubbed the receivers, and a lot of these were actually chambered in 308. They were 7.62, but they were, it's a 308 cartridge. A lot of these are actually German, and they were, according to what I've researched, I've found, says that they were sold to the Israelis, who would scrub them and then, use them. And then they were chambered in 308, rebarreled. And then after a while, they were then sold to Federal Ordnance, who then scrubbed off the Israeli markings and added the American Eagle. Now, that's not the end of the story for this particular rifle. Otherwise, it would have just been kind of interesting. This is definitely not the stock that would have been on the Federal Ordnance rifle, because a lot of those had a military-style stock. This obviously does not. So, the thing that caught my eye about this firearm is the marking on the barrel. Which reads, barrel by Shilen, 264 Berber. There is a serial number, definitely not a German or any of that kind of serial number. So I've been trying to find out what 264 Shilen is. 264 Berber. I contacted Shilen Barrels, emailed them, gave them the information I had. We had a little bit of back and forth on email about, trying to figure out what the chambering was. They believe that it would have been a barrel that the customer supplied the reamer for. And when they finish, a barrel for somebody, they will ship the reamer back with them. They don't keep any records as to what the dimensions of the chamber were, because it isn't their standard chambering. So I have been trying to figure out, well, what is it? And somebody said, well, it's probably a 264 Win Mag. I don't understand why somebody would mark it the way they did if it was just a standard 264 Win Mag. So when it arrived today, one of the first things I did was, let's see if a 264 Win Mag will fit in there. And it does not. In fact, it only halfway fits into the chamber. Chamber is not, you can't put a 264 Win Mag in there. I did find that you could put a 6.5 by 55 Swedish, but even it doesn't sit necessarily right in the chamber. And of course, I did this without the bolt in the gun. just to see what might fit in there. So the 6.5 Swede isn't necessarily the right one either. So it is definitely going to need a chamber casting. Now, this is a 24-inch barrel, blued. Rather nicely made, of course, because Shilen makes excellent barrels. Now, I did manage to figure out the twist on it. It is a 1 in 9 twist, which is what you would expect for a 264 Win Mag. So, it has the same twist as a Win Mag, but is not. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cast the chamber and find out what exactly the chambering for it is. And I had been looking at the bolt and everything else to go along with this. And, you know, there's the remnants of a serial 8012 on the bottom. A lot of your Federal Ordinance rifles have non-matching numbers. You know, you're not going to sit down and find a fully matching German Mauser in all of this. It is a model 98. But as you can see, there are no other markings. And part of the thing is a lot of the rifles were German. There's been statements that there were also Spanish Mausers and Czech Mausers that were also converted over. But there are no German markings. Floor plate has a proof mark that I'm going to have to research. And this is another thing I noticed. Somebody repurposed a stock, which fair enough. Safety had been removed. And in this case, the safety may not have been on this rifle, although I'm not exactly sure. I haven't taken it completely apart. But, of course, there is the safety on the bolt. So you do still have a safety. By flipping that up. Trigger pull on it's excellent. But yeah, just a odd pickup. Interested in finding out what the parent cartridge is, and then starting the journey of trying to figure out what the proper loading for it would be. You know, obviously it'd be a 6.5 or 264 bullet, but until I get the chamber cast and figuring out what the cartridge, the brass should be, it's not overly helpful. Anyway, I'm kind of asking here, if you have ever come across something marked 264 Berber besides the couple of mentions of them online. One was from the store that sold this rifle used down in San Antonio, and then the company that I purchased it from, you know, they bought it, and so there was 2 locations, and one of those is obviously the Guns International listing. So, and I did post on Reddit asking if anybody's got any kind of information, but I was actually looking for, trying to figure out, getting a base idea of what the chambering could be. But of course, nobody really knows. So if you've ever come across or heard of 264 Berber, or you know somebody who, the individual who actually did have this made of, I'd really be interested in finding out more information. Anyway, thank you for watching. See you again soon.